The air in the bustling port city of Tyre was thick with the brine of the Mediterranean and the heavy perfume of exotic spices. But for Elazar, the atmosphere was suffocatingly heavy with obligation. He was not a poor man. His warehouse near the docks held enough cedar and Tyrian purple to comfortably outfit a Roman legion. Yet as he stood before the counting table, the weight of the silver felt unbearable. Senator Caius ben Levi, a Judean noble with powerful connections stretching from Caesarea to Rome, was preparing for a dangerous and prolonged journey. This was not a business trip. This was a desperate political gamble seeking high office from the emperor himself. If Caius succeeded, his fortune would multiply 100-fold. If he failed, his family would be ruined and his associates liable for his debts. Before departing, Caius was liquidating a significant portion of his assets, distributing them among his most trusted stewards, not as wages, but as raw capital, a test of their character and loyalty. To Elazar, the successful merchant, Caius handed 5 massive leather bags, each containing a talent of silver, a weight of pure metal so staggering it represented the combined wages of a common laborer for 15 years, or a master craftsman for 2 centuries. 5 such talents. Elazar looked at the shimmering, highly refined metal, catching the flickering light of the oil lamp. It was more wealth than he had ever handled that did not belong to him. He felt his chest tighten, not with greed, but with profound dread. He was already a man driven by ambition, perpetually seeking the next profitable venture. Yet lately, success had tasted like ash. He had the finest silks, the fastest ships, and the most comfortable villas, but the frantic energy required to maintain it all left him hollow. Now Caius was placing this astronomical trust upon him, 5 lives' worth of potential, and Elazar knew exactly what the master expected. Growth, relentless, risky, unforgiving growth. Caius fixed him with a sharp, discerning gaze, his eyes reflecting the metal. Elazar, the senator's voice was low and resonant. I know your acumen. You are fearless where others hesitate. Do not let this silver rest. If I return successful, the reward will be beyond measure. If you fail, the failure will be equally monumental. Elazar's hand trembled slightly as he tied the mouth of the final bag. He saw his own life reflected in the silver. Vast potential, yet requiring ceaseless labor and constant risk. He wanted peace. He wanted a life where he could study the scrolls of the prophets, but instead he was chained to the unforgiving god of commerce. He nodded, the unspoken promise weighing on his shoulders, realizing that this immense gift was not a blessing, but a crushing new layer of responsibility that might finally break the brittle shield of his ambition and expose the deep, terrifying void beneath. The moment Senator Caius ben Levi's caravan disappeared over the dusty hills toward the coastal road, heading for the long sea voyage to Italy, the paralysis that had gripped the household vanished, replaced by a feverish urgency. Elazar did not waste a single hour. Unlike his immediate impulse to simply guard the silver, the master's penetrating gaze and words, "Do not let this silver rest," echoed in his mind, fueling a fierce energy. He knew that burying the silver was an option for the faint-hearted, but for him it was unthinkable. To bury a talent was to betray his nature and, more importantly, betray the one quality Caius trusted, his inherent recklessness married to meticulous planning. Elazar knew the Syrian trade routes were volatile, offering incredible returns but also high risk of banditry and storms. He immediately sought out the most coveted goods, fine Arabian incense and precious gems sourced from the Indian traders who docked secretly in southern ports. His strategy was aggressive. He split the 5 talents into 10 smaller, manageable ventures, spreading the risk across multiple mediums and geographies. He invested heavily in a struggling olive oil press near Galilee, betting on a good harvest and securing distribution rights early. He financed 3 cargo ships, taking a dangerous percentage of the risk of their journey across the turbulent waters towards Alexandria. The work was grueling, demanding sleepless nights poring over ledgers and spending days haggling under the merciless sun. There was no joy in this initial phase. It was pure, desperate labor aimed at justification. Within the first year, his bold strategy began to pay dividends. The olive harvest was spectacular, tripling his initial outlay in that sector. The cargo ships, though battered, returned laden with grain and exotic timber, creating immediate profit. The pressure was so immense, however, that he felt himself fraying. He caught himself snapping at his wife, neglecting the Sabbath observance he cherished, viewing every interaction through the lens of potential financial gain or loss. Yet one cold morning, as he watched a team of workers unload the newly acquired timber, men who now had steady wages because of his enterprise, a subtle shift occurred. The profit was astounding. 5 talents had indeed become 10. But the true reward wasn't the numerical doubling of the metal. It was the realization that the activity itself had created ripples of opportunity for others. The silver, once a heavy burden of expectation, had become kinetic energy, a force field of necessary action that demanded he move beyond his own anxieties. The fear of failure had not vanished, but it was now overshadowed by the profound, demanding responsibility of creation. He realized then that Caius's demand was not merely about wealth accumulation, but about the productive utilization of one's entire self, something Elazar had been too weary and successful to recognize before. Miles away, in a quiet, dust-motes dancing chamber within Caiaphas's main estate near Jerusalem, Tiberius, the chief scribe and steward, lived in a constant state of agonizing stillness. Tiberius was a scholar, meticulously organized, a master of tax code and ancient languages, but utterly crippled by decision fatigue. His world was governed by rules and absolutes. The chaotic nature of the marketplace was his worst nightmare. When Caiaphas entrusted him with his portion, it was the smallest sum, 1 single talent, a fraction of what Elazar received. Yet to Tiberius, it felt infinitely heavier. He watched Elazar and the other stewards depart, their faces alight with the thrill of the challenge. But Tiberius felt only a tightening coil of terror in his gut. The master had called him astute, but Tiberius translated that as, "I expect perfect, flawless results." He recalled Caiaphas's reputation among the servants, a man who reaped where he did not sow, a man who demanded his due without fail. In Tiberius's mind, the master was a harsh, unforgiving judge. His fear crystallized into a single, paralyzing question. What if I lose it? What if a drought comes? What if the emperor rejects Caiaphas and the whole estate is seized? Tiberius calculated every potential risk, and every risk led to one undeniable conclusion. Any action was a move toward failure. Preservation became his supreme virtue. He spent 3 days in agonized contemplation, the single sack of silver hidden beneath his pallet, its presence leaching the sleep from his nights. On the 4th day, under the cloak of deepest midnight, armed with a small shovel and wrapped in a coarse cloak, he slipped out of the estate. He walked to the edge of the property, to a small private family burial plot where his ancestors lay. This was sacred ground, unplowed, untouched by commerce. It was the only place he felt secure enough to hide such a treasure. Digging slowly, painstakingly, he excavated a deep hole, lined it with oilcloth, placed the heavy bag of silver inside, and covered it meticulously, patting the earth smooth and placing a specific, unremarkable stone over the spot to mark it. As the earth settled over the coin, so too did a chilling sense of relief settle over Tiberius's soul. He had protected the master's property. He had secured the principal. His logic was flawless. The master demanded his own back, and now he would receive it, untouched by the chaotic hands of fortune. He returned to his duties, meticulously copying deeds and balancing accounts, but beneath the facade of perfect order, his spirit had shrunk. He had solved the problem of the talent, but in doing so, he had buried not just silver, but every ounce of his own potential for growth, replacing purpose with the empty, draining labor of constantly guarding a secret grave. The seasons turned, cycling through the heat of summer and the stark chill of winter, not once, but 3 full times, years stretching into an eternity for both men. For Elazar, the passing of time was a blur of calculated risks and monumental successes. His portfolio grew sprawling and complex. He moved beyond merely accumulating wealth. He began to invest in infrastructure. A new pier in Sidon, a system of wells in a water-poor village. His employees no longer saw him as merely their demanding employer, but as the engine of their stability. He learned the names of their children, attended their life events, and understood that the true return on investment was the living, breathing network of human connections his efforts forged. He often walked the docks late at night, feeling exhausted but surprisingly fulfilled. He had started with 5 talents and now had more than 11, the interest having compounded beautifully. Yet, the initial crushing weight was gone. The silver had been transformed from a symbol of burden into a tool of creation. He was still anxious for Caius's return, but his anxiety stemmed from a desire to justify his effort, not his fear of loss. He had risked everything, and in doing so, he had found that his own boundaries were far wider than he ever imagined. Tiberius, however, experienced those 3 years as a slow, agonizing slide into spiritual entropy. His days were identical: wake, work, obsess, check the stone, sleep fitfully. The routine was suffocating. He never dared to leave the Jerusalem estate for long, afraid some accident might befall his hidden treasure. He refused all opportunities for promotion or new responsibilities, knowing they might distract him from his primary, self-imposed duty of vigilance. While Elazar's life expanded outward into the world, Tiberius's life contracted inward, shrinking to the small, dark space around his secret. His fear did not diminish with time. Instead, it curdled into resentment. Resentment toward the master for giving him the burden, and resentment toward the world for being too unpredictable to trust. He often rationalized his decision by studying the failures of others. When a merchant caravan was looted on the Jericho road, he muttered, "See, if I had invested, I would have lost everything." When a local bank failed, he reassured himself, "The earth is the safest vault." He had achieved perfect security, but at the cost of his soul. He had preserved the master's silver perfectly, but he had spent his own life, moment by agonizing moment, on fear and stagnation. He had ensured that when the master returned, the one talent would be accounted for, but Tiberius himself would have absolutely nothing new to show for the years granted to him. The messenger arrived during the scorching midday heat of the third summer. He was a young courier, exhausted and covered in dust, bearing the senator's seal. Caius was not merely returning, he was returning in triumph. His mission had been successful. He had secured vast grants of territory and monopolies from Rome, and he was now returning as a man of immense power, the wealthiest Judean in the region. The news sent waves of relief through Eleazar's heart, quickly followed by a fresh surge of adrenaline. The day of the reckoning was upon him. He immediately began the complex process of liquidation and accounting, compiling meticulous records of every transaction. He realized with a sudden philosophical clarity that the true judgment wouldn't be on the sheer volume of silver he returned, but on the complexity and fidelity of his efforts. Had he been honest? Had he been diligent? Had he honored the master's trust by fully engaging with the opportunity? He looked at the final sum, 10.5 talents. The extra half talent was the interest he had earned on his own profits, which he knew he legally deserved, yet he decided to present the full amount, recognizing that the lesson lay in complete dedication. He paused in the courtyard, watching a local potter shaping clay on his wheel, a man who worked with passion and focus, creating beauty from mud. Elazar felt a profound envy for the potter's simple, undeniable sense of purpose. He, Elazar, dealt in abstract numbers and volatile markets, yet the potter dealt in tangible, useful creation. This led him to a devastating realization. The 5 talents had forced him to work, yes, but the work itself had accidentally taught him the meaning he had been seeking in his pre-Caius wealth. He had been forced out of comfort and into growth. He stood there, feeling the wind against his robes, considering the fate of his fellow stewards, particularly Tiberius, whom he knew to be highly cautious. It brought him to a philosophical crossroads, a question that resonated deeply with the core of the parable itself. When faced with a great gift or responsibility, is the heavier burden the fear of failure or the silent guilt of never having tried at all? Do you find yourself hiding potential gifts, your creativity, your compassion, your ability to forgive, in the earth of comfort and certainty for fear of judgment? Take a moment and perhaps share your own experience in the comments below. For Eleazar, the answer was clear. The guilt of never trying would surely be the heavier weight, a lifetime of what-ifs far worse than any financial loss. His mind turned back to the impending reckoning, preparing not just an account of silver, but a testimony of stewardship. The arrival of Senator Caius Ben Levy was a spectacle designed to assert absolute dominance. He did not simply ride into the city. He arrived with a column of newly acquired Roman guards, their armor gleaming, their disciplined march echoing the finality of his success. The estate was transformed into a place of awe and terror. Caius, seated upon a massive carved chair imported from the city of Rome, looked utterly different, older, harder, radiating cold imperial authority. The reckoning began swiftly. Elazar was the first called. He approached the master's seat, bowing low, his heart pounding a steady rhythm of fear mixed with confidence. He did not immediately present the silver. Instead, he presented the detailed scrolls of his operations, speaking first of the risks taken, the droughts narrowly avoided, and the complex web of trade partnerships he had forged. "Master," Elazar stated, his voice ringing clearly, "when you entrusted me with 5 talents, I feared the weight of them. But I understood your charge, that they must not rest. I took your silver and immediately invested it in volatile markets, risking loss but seeking proportional return. I worked ceaselessly, relying on the divine blessing and the integrity of my partners." Only then did he instruct his own stewards to lay out the 10 full talents of silver on the marble floor, gleaming brightly. "I return your 5, master, and present 5 additional talents, earned through labor and risk." Caius did not immediately touch the silver. He looked directly into Eleazar's eyes, searching past the numbers into the man standing before him. He saw not the weary merchant who had been seeking meaning and acquisition 3 years prior, but a man refined by responsible effort, possessing true purpose. Caius's stern face finally broke into a rare smile, a gesture of genuine admiration that warmed the cold room. "Well done, Elazar, my good and faithful servant," Caius boomed, his voice lifting the tension from the room. "You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many. Enter into the joy of your master." The reward was instant and total. Elazar was given full ownership of the 10 talents he had produced, granted management over a new, vast estate Caius had acquired, and elevated to a partner in the senator's vast new enterprises. It was not merely a financial reward. It was the ultimate validation of Eleazar's character. He had successfully taken the gift of life and opportunity and utilized it to its maximum potential, proving that the true value of the talent lay not in its metal, but in the dedication required to grow it. The tension remained palpable as the second servant approached. His name was Judah, a pragmatic man who specialized in agricultural logistics, having been entrusted with 2 talents. Judah was inherently cautious, lacking Elazar's soaring ambition, but possessing a strong, persistent work ethic. He too bowed before the formidable Senator Caius. Judah's accounting was far less dramatic than Elazar's. He had not engaged in high-risk shipping or volatile currency exchange. Instead, he had invested steadily in established, secure ventures, irrigation systems for wheat fields near the coast, bulk purchases of grain during low seasons, and financing for reliable, small-scale farming families. He explained his strategy with humble clarity. "Master, I knew I did not possess Elazar's capacity for risk, but I also remembered your command against idleness. I sought stability and certainty. I invested in the things that feed our people, ensuring slow, dependable growth against the vagaries of the market. He presented 4 talents of silver, neatly stacked and accounted for. He had doubled the investment through persistent, measured effort. Caius examined the scrolls detailing the modest but consistent returns. He saw a man who understood his own limits, yet still stretched them for the sake of the task. Judah had used his own 2 talents, of skill, diligence, and caution, fully. The master's face softened again, reaffirming the principle that applied equally to the 5 and the 2. And to you, Judah, I say the same. Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a smaller quantity, and you too shall be made ruler over great things. Enter into the joy of your master. The reward for Judah was proportional to his efforts and his initial stake, securing his family's prosperity and elevating his status within the estate's administration. The master's message was being hammered home with terrifying clarity. The expectation was not uniform success, but proportional effort. Whether given much or little, the servant was expected to fully employ his capacities. The sin was not low return. The sin was stagnation. Every steward present understood this now. Every one except for the final man called forward. The man whose entire existence for the past 3 years had been defined by the absolute absence of action. Tiberius shuffled forward, his meticulously clean tunic and pressed linen scrolls contrasting sharply with his disheveled, pallid face. He carried only a small, heavy cloth sack, the very sack Caius had given him 3 years prior, stained now with the damp scent of the earth. He watched Elazar and Judah depart, bathed in the master's approval, and their success only magnified his internal terror. They had risked and won, but he had chosen safety, and now he had to justify that choice. The silence in the chamber was crushing as Tiberius stood before Caius. He refused to look the master in the eye, focusing instead on the pristine marble floor. He had rehearsed his speech countless times in the solitude of his room, honing his justification into a shield of flawless logic. He laid the bag down, the heavy thud resonating in the hushed room, a sound so final, so unlike the ringing clatter of Elazar and Judah's prophets. "Master," Tiberius began, his voice brittle with anxiety, "I confess that I was unable to increase your fortune, but I have not lost it." He reached into the bag and pulled out the single talent wrapped carefully in the same oilcloth he had used 3 years ago. The silver gleamed, perfectly untarnished, exactly as the master had left it. "Master, I knew you to be a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed." He spat out the accusation, believing his intellectual honesty would protect him. "I knew that any risk I took might lead to loss, and that your wrath over loss would be catastrophic. Therefore, I was afraid. I went and hid your talent in the earth. See, here you have what is yours, exactly as you gave it to me, safe and preserved from the corruption of the world and the chaos of the market." He stood back, waiting for praise, or at least for grudging acceptance of his preservation efforts. His fear was so overwhelming that it blocked out the possibility of any other reaction. He had fulfilled his obligation as a guardian, and in his own mind he was blameless, even commendable, for his diligence in avoiding risk. He had achieved perfect stasis. Senator Caius Ben Levi did not move for a long, terrible moment. The silence was heavier than the talents themselves. When the master finally spoke, his voice was not the booming fury Tiberius expected, but a cold, surgical disappointment that cut far deeper than rage. "You wicked and slothful servant." Caius's voice was low, yet it cracked like a whip. "You stand before me, presenting your cowardice as wisdom, your laziness as meticulous preservation. You claim you knew me to be a harsh man, reaping where I did not sow. If you truly believed I was such a man demanding profit at all costs, then why did you not act with the minimal prudence required of even the most fearful debtor? Why did you not, at the very least, put my money in the bank with the money changers?" Caius leaned forward, his eyes boring into the scribe. "The money changers require no great risk, Tiberius. They offer a meager interest, guaranteed by law. Even a fool who fears the market knows enough to gain a small return by lending. You claim fear, but I see sloth. I see profound, willful idleness. You failed not because the risk was too high, but because the effort was too inconvenient. You chose to bury the talent because burying it was easier than facing the possibility of failure, easier than exercising the very gift of ingenuity I gave you when I appointed you to this house." The master's anger was not over the lost profit, which was insignificant to him now. It was over the criminal waste of Tiberius's potential and his years. The silver had remained untarnished, but Tiberius's soul was rusted with fear and inaction. Caius snapped his fingers. "Take the talent from him. Give it to Elazar, the one who has 10. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away." The sentence was pronounced, final and devastating. Tiberius had thought he possessed the talent by guarding it, but in the ultimate sense, he possessed nothing, not even the desire to try. The greatest punishment was not banishment or poverty, but the stripping away of his illusion of safety, revealing the barren landscape of a life spent in perpetual dread. Tiberius was cast out, banished from the estate, his meticulous records and scholarly pursuits rendered meaningless. He left clutching nothing, utterly impoverished, not by the loss of the silver, but by the shattering realization that his entire philosophy of defensive living had been judged as a moral failure. He had been so focused on avoiding the consequences of risk that he had incurred the far greater consequence of regret. Meanwhile, Elazar, now a partner in the senator's enterprise, reflected deeply on the dramatic scene. He understood now that the parable of the talents was not fundamentally about currency or business management. It was a profound metaphor for the gift of life itself, the inherent time, opportunity, energy, and unique abilities entrusted to every single person. The master, whether he was a demanding senator or the divine presence, demanded not perfection, but engagement. He did not ask for results that exceeded our capabilities, but for the full, earnest utilization of what we have been given. The 5 talents Elazar received were his natural gifts, his sharp mind, his ambition, his resourcefulness. Had he buried them, those gifts would have withered, rendering him just as slothful as Tiberius, regardless of his prior wealth. The true sin was not failing to make profit, but failing to live productively and creatively. The terror that had crippled Tiberius, the fear of a harsh master, was a projection of his own demanding inner critic. He had judged himself harshly, and therefore assumed God or man would judge him worse. The talent taken from him and given to Elazar was the very capacity for action. Tiberius's decade of inaction had so deeply ingrained the habit of fear that even if he were given another chance, he would likely bury the silver again. The parable exposed the ultimate truth. Talents are only valuable when kinetic. They are not possessions to be hoarded, but energies to be expended. The meaning Elazar had been searching for on the docks of Tyre, the void he felt despite his success, had been filled not by the silver itself, but by the relentless, purposeful labor the silver demanded. He had been forced to face his fears, to invest himself fully, and in doing so he had discovered his own strength, transforming potential into destiny. He realized his life had not been wasted because he had dared to risk it, realizing that the earth is not a vault for treasure, but a field for sowing and reaping. The greatest tragedy is not loss, but the absolute certainty of regret that comes from refusing to participate in one's own life journey, letting fear be the shovel that buries all possibility of joy and growth in the darkness of stagnation.